Good morning. My name is Tegan Hoffman, and I'm the Executive Director of Coastal Quest. Thanks for joining us this morning. I'll be one of the facilitators for the webinar today, along with Rachel Wadsworth, my colleague. And I'd like to welcome all of you to our Achieving Coastal 30 by 30 webinar series. Before we begin, I have a couple of announcements to make. First, this webinar is being recorded. Coastal Quest may use video footage recorded during the webinar for educational promotional purposes. The recording of the webinar will be available for viewing following the webinar on the Coastal Quest website, so stay tuned. Second, this webinar is being translated live in Spanish. To access the live translation, click the closed caption and translation button at the bottom of your Zoom application and select Spanish. You can also select closed caption as an option. Third, after the panel, we will have a Q&A session with the panelists. We have turned off chat comments for the webinar, but we encourage all attendees to ask questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom application. And we will call on you once we see your question and ask you to ask the question live. We will try to go and get to as many questions as we can this morning. So let's get started today because we have an amazing lineup of speakers focusing on planning, funding, and building multi-benefit coastal 30 by 30 solutions. So as many of you, I see some familiar names and faces have already been to our other two webinars, which is part of our three-part series where we've been focusing and learning about a wide range of multi-benefit coastal 30 by 30 project solutions, looking at what they look like, how to frame them, what are some of the funding opportunities, what are public and private donor coastal 30 by 30 funding priorities, and how to implement and achieve projects at different scales, locally, regionally, state, nationally, and globally. And if you didn't get a chance to listen to our first two last week on coastal solutions, exploring coastal solutions and learning about funding priorities, you can watch those via YouTube when we send those links. And today we're doing our third webinar in the series and having a conversation about implementation and funding. So first, we just love to hear from you and let us know where you're joining us from. And tell us, what is the closest ocean or sea to you? It looks like we have some people from different parts of the world. Exciting. Thank you for joining us near and far. We'll wrap this up in a second. Great. And Sadie, why don't we close the poll and share the results? Looks like we have a strong turnout from the people close to the Pacific Ocean, and we have quite a few people from Atlantic, Indian, and even the Arctic. So thanks for joining us. Okay. Can we stop sharing the results? And I'm going to move on. All right. So today we have an exciting lineup. We'll learn from peers about assembling funding for a coastal 30 by 30 project, including how to secure long-term financing, how to match different public and private funding sources, some of the challenges that our project managers and leaders who are implementing these projects have faced, and how they've overcome those challenges, and telling compelling stories to funders, how to do that effectively. So our agenda for today is, first, I will share some information about Coastal Quest and our Coastal 30 by 30 initiative. And then we'll hear from 4 speakers leading different types of multi-benefit coastal 30 by 30 projects, ranging from kelp restoration and seagrass to wetlands and dune restoration and watershed management. And we'll then have plenty of time for discussion and Q&A. And finally, Rachel will share some next steps and opportunities for further engagement. So first, a little bit about Coastal Quest. Coastal Quest is a service-oriented nonprofit that works with communities and governments to build more resilient coasts by inclusive science-based planning, strengthening governance, financing, and project implementation for a just, prosperous, sustainable future. And we provide physical sponsorship services to support CBOs, collaboratives, and their projects, early leaders, and government partnerships. I wanted to share a bit of background about our Coastal 30 by 30 initiative and how we got to where we are today. It started in 2021 when Coastal Quest hosted with University of California, Irvine, a virtual Coastal 30 by 30 conference, and it was attended by over 2,700 participants engaged in coastal work and interested in learning more about Coastal 30 by 30. Conference participants repeatedly surfaced a need for ongoing support to engage with Coastal 30 by 30, which Coastal Quest set out to investigate further. In the meantime, the 30 by 30 movement has been growing with a focus to restore, connect, and conserve 30% of lands and waters by 2030. Biden administration adopted 30 by 30. Multiple states in the US have issued executive orders for state 30 by 30 goals, and a massive amount of new public funding sources have become available and commitments made from multilaterals, bilaterals, America the Beautiful earmarked funds, as well as infrastructure dollars, and private philanthropy funding is also being put towards 30 by 30 efforts and projects. But there hasn't really been a focus on the coast or the nexus of offshore ocean work and freshwater. And yet 40% of us in the world population live within 100 kilometers of the coast. So really, when thinking about the opportunity here to target coastal ecosystems is really also the opportunity to have multiple benefits, to link land and ocean efforts, focusing on land-sea connections and critical coastal ecosystems such as watersheds, bays, wetlands, dunes, rocky intertidal, and having solutions that benefit not only biodiversity, but also providing clean water, increased access to nature, improved public health, food security and sovereignty, climate mitigation, adaptation and resilience, and cultural significance. And so making the case for multi-benefit solutions for the coast is actually really quite easy if you frame it well and have a robust story to tell, and it's a way to finance the project, as you'll hear about today. So after our incredibly well-attended conference that I mentioned in 2021, many people and organizations reached out to us to learn more about Coastal 30 by 30 solutions, and we decided to ask conference attendees a few questions so we could design our future programs to better serve their needs. And so we surveyed and also interviewed 179 practitioners and 21 representatives in the interviews to better identify priorities and trends to guide, design, and deliver support and to help them create and achieve multi-benefit coastal 30 by 30 solutions. And our practitioners shared with us loud and clear that they really needed and wanted support on securing and managing funds, on understanding coastal 30 by 30 and how to contribute to achieving 30 by 30 goals, and how to develop a multi-benefit coastal 30 by 30 plan and project. And going a little bit deeper into our key findings and results, it was very clear that there was a demand for learning more and providing technical assistance and offering support around funding and financial issues such as fundraising, managing funds, fiscal sponsorship, all the roles that Coastal Quest is stepping up to play in the past couple years, and also helping with coordination, collaboration, and project planning, and then building a community of practice. And so we are piloting and launching some of these efforts with technical assistance, small grants, and rolling out this webinar series with the goal of a launch full force later this year. And so Coastal Quest is really focused on coastal regions from whitewater to blue water, rural and urban, making those land-sea connections, helping support ally organizations and partners building their own multi-benefit projects, public-private partnerships, and we're very much supportive of engaging efforts in priority communities. And that was a little bit about our work. So now I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Rachel Wadsworth, to introduce our next panel.
Thank you so much, Tegan, and thank you to everyone joining us today. And I'm actually going to kick us off with a poll. We're going to learn a little bit more about you. We learned where you're from or what ocean or sea you're calling in from. And now we want to know what stage you're at in funding your project. So Sadie's going to launch the poll for us. And we invite you to respond as to where you are in your, what best describes where you are in our funding, okay? Great, thank you. Oh, great. Super, thank you. Everyone's really interacting. Okay, seems like we're slowing down. All right, I think we can stop the poll and share the results. Okay, great. So it looks like a lot of you are kind of neck and neck from just getting started, receive some funding, looking for more. And then there's a healthy amount of you that are ready to pitch your project. Congratulations. Some of you have applied, but you're waiting. That's the stressful time, right? And then secured a portion looking for a match. So congratulations. And we're going to cover all those topics today. So if we could stop sharing the results of our poll and move on so I can introduce the speakers. So today we're going to have an amazing lineup of speakers focusing on funding coastal 30 by 30 projects. First, we're going to hear from Paul Detjens, who's a civil engineer and program manager in Contra Costa County's Flood Control and Water Conservation District. And he will be speaking to us today about his project on the Lower Walnut Creek restoration. Next, we'll hear from Wesley Crile, who's a coordinator of the Coastal Dune Restoration and Management Project for the University of Hawaii Sea Grant, and he will speak to us about building a project pipeline for restoring Maui's coastal dunes to improve community resilience and enhance wildlife habitat. Then we'll hear from Kevin Whilden, who's the co-founder and executive director of Sustainable Surf, and he will speak about his funding model for SeaTrees, which is a program of sustainable surf that plants, protects, and restores blue carbon coastal ecosystems around the world. And finally, we'll hear from Makalea from the Nature Conservancy Hawaii. And Makalea will speak to us about her work to establish and fund a natural connected wetland system in the Hawaiʻi wetlands to protect and enhance the ecosystem and community of Kaneohe Bay. So with that, Paul, can you share your screen and go ahead and get started? Thank you.
How's that looking? Good morning, everybody. You see it okay?
Looks great, Paul. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, I'm Paul Detjens. I'm with Contra Costa County Flood Control and Water Conservation District. And for those of you not in California and may not know about what Contra Costa actually is, Contra Costa is the 9th most populous county in California. And our name means opposite coast because we are across the bay from a little town called San Francisco. And in our county, we have thousands of miles of streams, and my agency, the Contra Costa County Flood Control and Water Conservation District, owns and manages nearly 80 miles of them. Normally the major stuff, the big parts of it, the most downstream parts. And today we'll talk about Lower Walnut Creek, which is located at the mouth of the largest watershed in the county and right on the south shore of Suisun Bay, which is one of the bays that make up San Francisco Bay. So our project is specifically designed to restore wetlands for a number of rare and endangered species, but we're also maintaining, or in some cases improving, levels of flood protection. And we create a system that works sustainably with natural sedimentation processes. And we do this specifically to reduce or eliminate maintenance dredging that was super expensive and also very environmentally damaging. And working with partners, we provide public access and education and recreational opportunities. So our project, which we constructed in 2021 and 2022, We created and enhanced over 300 acres of coastal wetlands and adjacent habitats right on the shore of San Francisco Bay. And note all these multiple goals and benefits. This is an important part of the story I'll circle back on in a minute. So we took degraded, poor quality marshland like this, and we constructed 5.3 miles of new tidal channels. You can see the squiggly dendritic tidal channel here. Then we removed some levees and we turned it into thriving habitat like this. So that poor quality, crunchy pickleweed marsh is now thriving as a fully tidal ecosystem. And it's home to a number of rare and endangered species, which we think is pretty cool. And we topped it off by planting about 31,000 custom grown native plants. And we added some wildflowers as a cover crop. I took this picture last April, kind of at the peak of it, and all of our plants have little protective milk cartons. And if there's any question about our coastal location, you can see the oil tanker in the distance here. It's cruising by on Suisun Bay, so we are literally right on the shore. And we couldn't have done this without all of our funders and partners. All in all, it was about a $22 million project, and almost all of it was grant funded by the folks here on our funding side. So I want to talk about some of our key funding strategies that we had. So we did a community-based planning process, and in that process, we made a deliberate effort to provide multiple benefits, and that was broadly supported by a lot of stakeholders and regulators. And we hope that would translate into community support and funding, and we were very correct on that. We were also always marketing the project. We did community and stakeholder tours, countless Saturday mornings in a rental van, taking people out and showing them what the project would accomplish. We did a whole series of short YouTube videos. If you look up Lower Walnut Creek Adventures, you can see me make a fool of myself many ways in 2 minutes or less. We also did some marketing giveaways. We had some posters that we created and handed out, and then that was really replicated because teachers put them up in their classrooms and sometimes businesses hung them up. Our goal was really to create a positive buzz about the project, and we started that early, right after we kind of set our goals and objectives. We also strategically applied for planning funds, knowing that we would be invited back, hopefully, to apply for implementation funding, and that actually turned out to be the case. And we developed a grant matching strategy so that each grant could be used as match for other grants. We called this the color of the funds, or sometimes the flavor, because there's state, federal, and local funds, and each are slightly different. We also worked with a key partner, our local land trust, and they provided public access amenities. And we were also able to tie into some of their other unique funding sources, which are mainly foundations or other grants that are open to nonprofits, or even some just direct donations from their supporters. We also tied into work in kind from some of our industrial neighbors that wanted to, or sometimes needed to, be associated with a feel-good project like ours. We're surrounded by some oil refineries, and Marathon Petroleum donated a $4 million parcel of land that helped make our cool project into an extra cool expanded project. So their contribution wasn't really a grant, so I didn't include it in this table, but it's still part of the overall total. So this is all the grants we got for our phase 1 project. We had 10 grants for about $16.5 million, plus the $4 million for Marathon. For those of you that aren't in the San Francisco Bay Area, there's a lot of acronyms here. I'll go over them real briefly. CDFW is California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and Prop 1 is just an initiative of California. It was a water bond. So Prop 1, and so that was a state grant, and you can see all the different colors. And then in the columns, it's where they actually applied. We had grants early on for planning our project. CEQA is the California Environmental Quality Act, and our regulatory permitting phase, our design phase, construction phase. It's important to have money to pay for your team. That's actually not the contractor, but everyone else that's helping out. That's the construction management. And then don't forget your long-term monitoring. And so you can see each of these grants applied for different parts of it, with a majority focused on construction, because that was our largest part. We tapped into some EPA water quality improvement funds, and they were very generous in that they paid for planning, design, and also construction, helped to bridge those various phases. San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority is a local entity, and this is very important because we're able to leverage this local money to the state and federal level. And Measure AA is an initiative that everyone in the Bay Area supported. It passed, and each household in the Bay Area supports it by $1 a month, $12 a year, raises about $20 million a year over 20 years. And so we were able to receive about 7 million that went directly towards construction, our CM, and then monitoring. We also got funds from the California Wildlife Conservation Board, which is closely affiliated with California Department of Fish and Wildlife. We also got a NCWIC grant, National Coastal Wetlands Conservation. We didn't actually apply for it, but because we had worked closely with our state coastal conservancy group, they actually approached us and said, hey, we heard about your project. Would you like to partner with us? So that was $1 million grant. 30,000 off the top went to the Coastal Conservancy to manage it, and 970 was a pass-through. Even though it was our partner was the State Coastal Conservancy, it was still considered federal monies, thus labeled that way. We also got funds from the California Department of Water Resources. They do an integrated regional water management planning, and because we had habitat enhancement and flood protection, we were able to tap into that funding. We got a NIFWIF fund for National Coastal Resilience. That was actually pretty cool for us. One of, I think, 5 on the West Coast and 3 in California. And it showed that we were competitive on a national scale. Again, diversity of benefits. We were able to tie into some cap and trade funds that California gets from those that do greenhouse gas emissions. And we were able to get funds for greenhouse gas reduction by doing wetlands restoration. And then again, we had a follow-up from our first grant, which was the planning grant, and we got some implementation funding from that same proposition. And finally, via our partner, John Muir Land Trust, we got some funding from Resource Legacy Funds. So all in all, it was over $16 million a grant, tossed in about $1 million in local funds from my agency, mostly my staff time over a decade or so making this happen. And there's a whole other phase just on the public access with another suite of grants. But I'm near the end of my time, so I'm happy to answer any questions like what it's like to manage all 10 of these grants simultaneously at the end of the speakers. This is my contact info. Not that slide, that tells me I've gone too far. This slide here, this is my contact info, and you can always find more info at our webpage, lowerwalnutcreek.org. With that, I'll toss it back.
Thanks so much, Paul. Wesley, can you share your screen and get started?
Okay.
Great, looking good.
All right. Let's see. All right.
And if you want to turn on your video, Wesley, not to throw another.
Yeah, let me do that. Sorry. You'd think I would be Zoom literate by this stage, but still takes some time. Thank you, everybody. Hi, my name is Wes Crile. I work for the University of Hawaii Sea Grant program. I'm based on Maui. I'm the Dune restoration specialist. I'm the co-PI on this project with my colleague Tara Owens, who's coastal process and hazard specialist. And I'm going to be talking about the Kapukaʻulua Dune Restoration Design Program. I'd say it's a little bit earlier in the process to the project we just heard. We got a National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grant 2 years ago for planning, and we just received funding for the implementation stage of this project. So, all right, so here we are. Okay, so this is our area. This is our restoration area. This is a location on the north shore of Maui, sometimes called, referred to generally as Baldwin Beach or Lower Paia Park. It included 2 beach parks, one here, Lower Paia Park, and Baldwin Beach Park here. The proper name for this area is Kapukaʻulua, which means the Ulua fishing hole. And this is where our project was based. There were a lot of ecosystem impacts at Kapukaʻulua. Threatened infrastructure. This is a park pavilion that the ocean is slowly eroding away. We had to demolish about 1/3 of it just this year. There's an alluvium scarp exposure, which this kind of fine sediment clay is found in the backshore, and when the ocean exposes it, it causes some water quality degradation in the nearshore region. We have a ton of invasive species here, primarily ironwoods and kiave. Ironwoods are also known as Australian pine trees, and kiave is a mesquite tree. And the main issue was that there was just a loss of dune habitat in this area because of unmanaged foot traffic, and so no vegetation could really get established. This area also suffers from some of the highest erosion rates in the state, mainly because of a history of sand mining during the sugarcane era. And you can see here the projected sea level rise impacts are quite substantial for this area, with the projected shoreline retreat, that red line back there. So some of the opportunities with this site was that we had a chance to do some proactive ecosystem management over a large scale. Maui County and the state of Hawaii in general has done a lot of small scale projects, but this was a case where we could manage over a mile of coastline. The County of Maui was our major partner in this, specifically the Parks Department, and they had just acquired the land between the two beach parks. So we had Lower Paiute Park here, Baldwin Beach Park here, and they had just acquired this land in the middle. Since completing this planning phase of the project, the county has acquired an additional 40 acres. So now the entire almost a mile of coastline is under parks jurisdiction, which makes things a lot easier. Talking about co-benefits, we had an initiative led by the Parks Department that started in 2018. That was a master planning process for a community-led process that was trying to understand what the community wanted in terms of their park infrastructure and master planning process there. And during that process, dune restoration received a lot of community support. So we kind of had that initial community buy-in. And then there was another effort in 2020, 2021 that Parks was doing a vulnerability assessment, looking at the sea level rise impacts of all of their park properties around the county, but specifically started on Baldwin Beach because of the opportunities in this area. And so it was a very practical approach where, when sea levels rise and park infrastructure is threatened, what are the thresholds? What are the adaptive pathways that they can do to retreat or mitigate those impacts? And we actually had the space in this park to do something. In a lot of cases, we have critical infrastructure that's sandwiched right up next to the coastline. But in this case, we had lots of open space. And we were hoping that this would be a chance to create a gold standard for the state for dune restoration. So not that we could exactly replicate this, but that elements of this project could be replicated around the state. So we put together a Kapuka Advisory Committee, a subsection of community members, from fishermen to local cultural practitioners to government agencies to parks and planning departments. And they came up with some guiding principles for our project. We took those guiding principles and tried to integrate them as best we could into our proposed restoration strategies for the area. And really shared all this back with the advisory group so that they saw that their feedback was implemented into our design plan. Came up with some conceptual plans that we shared through our website. And now we're in the site plan review process, and we're heading towards permitting. And of course, we'll continue to do outreach. So some of the co-benefits of this, I think the key was that we aligned our project with the county parks master plan process. So we made sure that everything that we did for our project helped the Parks Department in some way. So we did surveys, technical studies. We did a flora and fauna survey, an archaeological assessment, and we had a LiDAR survey of our area. All of those studies and surveys could apply to the Parks Department's efforts as well. The county parks employee planner time was also considered in-kind match. We have 2 planners that we work with very closely in the Parks Department. And so their time was matched. And then in terms of framing our project, specifically for NIFWIF's requirements, NIFWIF requires that nexus of infrastructure and community resilience as well as habitat restoration. And so we actually looked at several parks around the island that are facing similar challenges, but we settled on this one because it kind of had that perfect mix of infrastructure protection. We have a critical roadway that leads in and out of Paia town. It's an important evacuation route for that community. We have a pump station, a sewage pump station there, and water main infrastructure, as well as habitat restoration potential for seabirds, monk seals, sea turtles. So those were the main co-benefits that we highlighted in our proposal. And these are our partners, and happy to answer questions at the end. I'll kick it back to you, Tegan.
Thanks so much, Wes. We really appreciate that. Kevin, can you share your screen and get started? Thank you.
Okay, can you all hear me? I'm just sharing my screen.
We can hear you loud and clear.
Can you
And
see my
we
screen?
see your screen. Thank you.
Okay, so hello everybody, Kevin Whilden. I'm co-founder and co-director of Sustainable Surf, along with my founding partner, Michael Stewart. And I'm going to tell you about our SeaTrees program. So SeaTrees is a, oops, not too fast, is a program of sustainable surf. We're a nonprofit based in California. And our mission is to reverse climate change. So I'm a geologist. I studied climate change in Antarctica in the 90s. And we're actually taking a very unique approach to how we engage the planet on solving this problem in a new way. And you see these articles come out every year. We have 10 years left to prevent climate catastrophe. Now this particular headline is 3 years old, and it's not slowing down, it's getting worse. So how do we change that narrative? And I'm going to rip through my presentation, I only got 7 minutes, but you're going to see how we bake in this whole narrative to a completely different story starting from the top. And it's coordination failures that are preventing meaningful action on climate change that are really the core of the issue. So having a story that changes how people coordinate and think about their role is key. And one of the key untapped things is that businesses are really engaged in climate change, trying to figure out a way to be authentic and engage their stakeholders and customers. So we're tapping into that with SeaTrees. And one of the things that's really missing in the narrative around climate change is hero stories. Like we're humans, we love stories, and in climate change, there's no hero to the story. Well, the ocean is actually the hero to the story, and its superpower is reversing climate change, because 90% of the carbon in the world's carbon cycle, the entire carbon cycle, is in the ocean. And blue carbon ecosystems are the way to get it there quickly. Mangrove forests sequester carbon 5 to 10 times faster than any tropical rainforest or forest on land, right? And kelp forests sequester more carbon globally than mangrove forests. Yet these are largely unintegrated in the global climate change policy programs and funding and so on, right? So we aim to change that. And this is what SeaTrees is. So we launched SeaTrees as a program in 2019. And the idea is to restore blue carbon ecosystems around the world. So mangrove forests, kelp forests, coastal watersheds, which are fully blue carbon, especially if you have mangroves and corals or kelp at the base of a healthy watershed that are more effective. I mean, even coral reefs, because a carbon markets person would say corals can't, generate carbon credits, therefore it's not part of our funding. Yet there is no ecosystem more threatened on the planet than coral reefs from climate change. So we're actually able to include that as a blue carbon project. Here's our current project map. We've got 16 projects. It's actually 2023. 16 projects around the world. We're looking at 5 more right now, and we're blending traditional nonprofit finance. We're a nonprofit. We work with other nonprofits that we essentially fund around the world with more traditional, with more sort of common e-commerce and commercial language as a way to really have impact and change the narrative. So far we planted over 2 million SeaTrees. A sea tree could be like a mangrove tree, a square foot of kelp forest, a coral reef fragment as a coral sea tree. And we're working with brands that go ocean positive. That means they've gone fully net zero in their climate commitment, and actually beyond that. We have 140 corporate donors and over 5,000 individual donors. And we're growing rapidly. Our revenue is growing about 60% each year. And here's our process, right? What we do is, that's my partner Michael there in the middle, and that's in Indonesia. And we go out and we identify rad ecosystem restoration projects around the world. The local community is super organized and ready to go, but needs something to really succeed. Oftentimes it's funding, sometimes it's storytelling and media, or data collection advice, whatever. Like we look for the partner that's strong and to help them put all the pieces in place. We then form a contract with that nonprofit. And then as they're running, we measure impact. And then the thing that we always do is tell the story, because it's the story that provides tangible value to all the donors and other stakeholders, as well as the actual impact of the environment. So here's our most recent project that we launched. This was just announced last week. It's a mangrove restoration project in Laguna San Ignacio in Baja California, operated by Wild Coast, our partner in San Diego. I'm sure many have heard of Wild Coast before. They're an amazing nonprofit that does ecosystem restoration in Mexico. And these women are fishermen's wives who are restoring their dunes in the mangrove, in the lagoons, to help raise the height of the sand to fight against sea level rise, which is a major threat in these low-lying dunes. And so here's where our funding comes from. We have a combination of individual donors, corporate donors, and foundation grants. Now, we're really tuned the dial towards corporate donors. This is a largely untapped potential for ocean conservation projects. And what we have to do to get that money is give them back what they need, which is good storytelling assets. Individual donors, basically it's keeping it authentic, keeping local people able to support their local ecosystem. And then foundation grants for getting into the hard science work that we want to do, as well as investment into radical new projects. So this is our e-commerce website. It's based on Shopify, like any other e-commerce site. And individuals can go in and donate to plant trees in this same project, right? And then for corporate donor value return, now this is key to understand what corporations want. I'm going to show you some clear examples in a moment, but we need media assets, because what they do is like they're communicating their value system of caring about the planet, caring about climate change to their stakeholders, their customers and their employees and their investors. That all matters, all of them. We mention them in our marketing in our social media, so it's actually reaching potential new customers. Right? We also have to share the same value, protecting ocean ecosystems. And we literally help them with their storytelling. Like how everyone communicates a story is key, and we don't want them saying the wrong thing or getting called out because we didn't catch what they were saying wasn't quite right. So we actually work really closely with the marketing departments of our corporate donors to help them tell a great story. So here's an example of a great story. This is our video just released last week about this project in Baja, and I'm going to play the 90-second version at the end. But the main partners in this project are Wild Coast, who runs the project. Roxy, which is a surf band, sent their pro surfer, Makalea Kinimako on the right, to go visit that project. And we told the story through her eyes. And One Earth Foundation was one of the corporate philanthropic donors. Just to show you the reach that we can get with this model. So last year we had 524 million potential impressions. That's a media reach. It's a number that's often quite large, but Salesforce did a video about our impact called Ecopreneurs. They're episode number 1. We've been in CNN, Forbes, Nat Geo, and so on, right? And that's because our focus on the storytelling, we're able to get a lot of eyeballs, and that gets a lot more attention than everything that we do. So we're just about to announce our kelp restoration project with Institutional Oceanography next month. We're working to restore the kelp forest off La Jolla and North County, San Diego. And we're also working with Scripps to do a major study for the carbon benefit of kelp forests. Nobody's ever done a fully integrated study of the benefit of kelp forests sequester CO2. Everybody wants it. It hasn't happened yet. We're currently fundraising through that. We've got about $1 million left to raise to get this project going. And the idea there is to actually create a Blue Plus methodology that allows many different funding streams to all integrate in this idea of protecting our healthy kelp forests. Carbon finance, local community funding, fishing and tourism revenue, government support, all those current funding streams are all disparate and disorganized. And what we want to do is organize them into a single coherent whole that shares the value of protecting kelp forests, both for people and the planet. And with that, I'm going to click over to a quick video and show you exactly how we tell our stories. So play that.
My name is Makalea Kinimako, and I'm from the island of Hawaiʻi. I'm a professional surfer and engineer and a native Hawaiian. I'm excited to be in Baja to meet the local women from the village of El Detjens and learn how they practice Malama Aina to care for the land by restoring their native mangrove forest. a canoe, our ocean planet is nothing more than a vessel floating amongst a vast ocean of stars. In order to ensure the sustainability and success of the planet, we as passengers need to consider how we are consuming resources and how we can replenish those resources in return.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Thank you for that. That's great. Very interesting. Congrats on the new projects you're launching. So now I'm going to invite Makalea to share her screen and turn on her video and share her work with us.
All right. It says I am unable to share. Somebody else's screen is still up.
I'm trying to get my window unshared.
No problem.
Here. Oh, stop share. Okay, got it.
There we go. Great.
Perfect.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Kevin.
Well, Kevin, you took my whole presentation. I don't know what to say now. That was great. It was exactly, in line with how we work and what we do. And really, it's about storytelling, right? You got to get people get excited about your project. I work in Hawaiʻi. Well, I work for, sorry, I'm going to start over. Aloha wau o Shauna Makalea Dudwa ane no Mililani Oahu mai au o Kahalui Maui Noho Ana o community-based program manager ma the Nature Conservancy. So I just wanted to introduce myself in our in Hawaiian, which is our how Hawaiian sounds in Hawaii, and really how we connect with people across the state, how we connect with people across the world. We saw a local girl from Kauai in Baja, and it's really about people, right? And so Kevin had mentioned it's about storytelling. And so how do we tell that story? And how do we capture the funding to tell that story? How do we look to advance international sustainable development goals, but on the local level? And how do we capture that funding and put it back to our community? And so that's our story. We work with multiple partners in this specific area called Hawaiʻi. It's on the east coast of Oahu, the main island in Hawaii. And we work with multiple partners, multiple landowners, multiple funding sources, and it's all about storytelling. And so we wanted to tell a story about this place, which starts in the ocean and goes all the way up to the mountains. This is a fish pond that's located right outside of the wetlands, and the wetlands are we're restoring it now. It looks beautiful now, but it didn't look like that just a little while ago. It's a wetland, and we're replanting it with traditional food crops and agricultural products, as well as benefiting nature. So our story, since Kevin told you everything I wanted to say, and really managing and matching different funding sources, I wanted to really focus on the intent of the story you tell and how you focus your vision so that you can be grounded and it benefit, and your story has multiple benefits. So you can benefit people, nature, your cultural practices, infrastructure, but really be grounded in place. And so this place has a kupuna council, and kupuna are elders, and they look at the past to inform our future. And so once this place, this area was farmed in 1200 AD, and it sustained a huge population on Oahu. And at one time we had 1 million people living in the Hawaiian Islands sustainably off the land, in reciprocity with the land. And so our Kupuna Council really helps us to keep that vision of feeding our people. And Aina Momona is this making the land fruitful and healthy. And if you take care of the land and you take care of the birds and the sea, the turtles and the fish, that they will take care of you. And so we look at a lot of historic videos of what and photos and aerial photos of what this place used to look like. And so all of this was our main infrastructure that connected downtown Honolulu to the rural areas and communities. And it was on the north side, or the inland side of the bridge, was agriculture, and then on the south side was a fish pond. And it actually, Kevin, got inundated with mangrove. So our challenge was to take out the mangrove because it is not native to this place. And so we worked with partners, different funding mechanisms, for-profit, nonprofit, other organizations, as well as private donors and foundations to actually remove a lot of this mangrove, which is really, really hard, but also worked Makai of the bridge, or on the ocean side of the bridge, to address issues that were in the ocean. So we really were working from Mauka to Makai, from the mountains to the ocean, to address multiple threats and stressors to this ahupua'a. And it really was about the people. It was getting the people excited again about putting their feet in the mud and getting dirty and getting, we say pa'aka'aina, which is connected to the land. You want to instill this sense of kuleana, a sense of responsibility, so that the next generation can take on this huge task that we all set forth for ourselves. I also hope that they're able to use these resources again to feed their families. And so we have little kids coming out to the fish pond wall and fishing in our fish ponds again, and actually like being connected to the land themselves, pulling weeds, building rock walls, and replanting native plants. And so for us, the Nature Conservancy, the way we help this and fill the capacity needs for these projects is actually helping to pair that with conservation planning processes, really looking at the resources that we have and helping to tell that story in a different way to a different audience, perhaps. We talk about the story we tell. So if you have an international funding agency that's looking at like NIFWIF, they want to balance infrastructure, community, and habitat restoration, we have to speak their language, right? We have to tell that story. So what is the story of community and people and resilience and food security? How do we translate that into the story that NIFWIF, for example, or NOAA wants to hear? And the benefit of investing in community is that it does have multiple benefits, and that we can tell that story in a little different way and categorize it with how many fish habitat we're restoring, put in, complement the work that's on the ground with science that's really helping to support the projects. How do we quantify that in native fish populations or invasive fish populations? You can see the blue dots here are native fish found closer to the estuaries and ocean, and then it becomes invasive plants as you go up near the houses and homes and invasive plants. How do we tell that transition from a disturbed ecosystem and restoring it and really showing that we're making a difference ecologically? And so we could see that in our taro patches where we have native bird coming back, native fishes coming back. This is an opu. It's kind of like a salmon that migrates through the estuary and back up to the mountains. And so we're grounded in also our Hawaiian cultures. So iola oi, iola au, when you live, I live. So it's just about the people and the place and making sure that we all benefit and telling that story to the right people. I also wanted to say that it is really important to know who are the people that are administering those grants, and go out and go ahead and go and contact them and help them hear that story before you even submit your grant application. Maybe once the application has been put out and it's public, you are not able to talk to them anymore, but definitely you're able to reach out to them and bring them into your story and bring them in and connect them to your project. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Makalea, and you really echoing something we heard in our last panel, which is the importance of connection with the funders and creating that relationship. So I'd like to invite all the panelists to put their videos on, and we are going to start our Q&A now. And I'd like to invite everyone in the audience to begin responding to the Q&A. You can type your questions in, and then we will be selecting questions to answer live. But I'm going to get us started with a few questions of my own. So this question is for all of you or any of you. Could you speak specifically to how you assembled the sustainable funding to take your project through the duration? And if that was a challenge, how did you think about that and plan for it? Because I know we saw the spectrum of funding status of our attendees, and it's from the gamut to starting to finishing and matching. So how did you address the sustainable funding element of your project? And let's see, I'll call on someone. Paul, can you start us off with that?
Sure. And are you talking about sustainable in terms of sustainable funding for a sustainable environment, or sustainable making sure that the project is enough to get your project over the finish line? Funding is enough to get your project over the finish line.
Yeah, good point. I think in this case, it's sustainable for the duration of the project, and then also maybe even for, you know, what you envision for the follow-on of your project. So taking it through the life cycle.
Well, we have a lot of experience as a bunch of nerdy engineers of developing an overall arc of project planning and project delivery. So we very early broke down our project into the phases and tried to look for funding that would be focused on those various phases. You remember my slide with the various colors of green that showed where they actually applied? We did a multi-pronged approach, recognizing that different funding sources would only cover certain different parts of funding. And so instead of just putting all of our eggs in one basket and applying for this type of funding, we really tried to diversify that, recognizing that we had some limited local funding that could apply to all of those or any of those. And then we really tried to seek out diverse funding sources that could cover not only the planning, the permitting, the design work, the actual construction, as well as the implementation oversight, which we call construction management, and then that long-term monitoring. And so we actually have grant funding over a 4-year period that covers the first 4 of our 10 years of required monitoring. So we're continuing to look for potential funding that could cover the remaining 6, but we're actually very pleased that we got funding to cover the first 4.
Great. Does anyone else want to speak to this question?
I can go. So I alluded to this in the beginning, but our investment is in our future. And for Hawaiians, we can't just start a project and think about a life cycle, because it's not just this specific time and place and 3 years and it's on a grant cycle. It's really about making sure that we leave this place better for our children, and that we have food for them and a good environment and all of these things. And so the story and the funding comes in empowering the community and making sure that we have that connection with the community and they're involved in our project, so that we can create systems change. And so that, I don't know if there is a long-term funding source for that, but we try to keep our funding the size that we can manage and scale up. And so if we have, we're building capacity and then we can scale to the next level, we're not just going out and looking at our whole entire budget and saying, okay, I want to fund all of these $6 million right now and do it in 3 years, but looking at scalability and then building in the next generation into our projects and empowering the next generation.
Thanks, Makalea. That's great. Kevin, I have a question for you. You talked about the importance of storytelling for your project. What other tips do you have for attracting corporate funders for some of our listeners?
Well, for corporations, the story is the main value that they get when they support projects like this. It's like, what is the story they tell to all of their stakeholders, right? And that's their customers, their employees are really important storytelling vehicle for corporations, like getting employees to come and visit projects if possible, but also just giving them the assets that they need to be able to tell their story to their employees and their investors. The corporation is, they don't get anything tangible in return other than they know they've done the right thing that matters to their value system. So in understanding how a corporation needs to tell stories, like they need a media asset pack. So we provide media asset packs just like any PR agency would do. So it's super easy for them, who are everyone's stressed and has limited time, for them to do it. And then the final part is it really is about sharing the language system with your our corporate donors. It's like helping them understand how to communicate in a way that's really effective to everybody. So we're in the middle with their PR and marketing departments all the time, like helping them with language, asking to see their press releases before they go out, asking to see their social media, giving them the language to use. So not only is it easy, but it's super effective. And what that does is it allows our message to broadcast around the world much faster than we could on our own. Like, we're a scrappy nonprofit, we're a startup, we've always had very little funding coming in until SeaTrees really started to take off. And we don't have a marketing budget at all. Yet we're able to get these mentions on massive major media channels because our corporate donors are able to get our story out there with their marketing budget. And that's how we basically blend this idea of modern science, ancient wisdom, helping repair the planet and get it out there. It's by using all the different partners and their strengths and weaknesses to tell the story.
Great, thank you. Wes, I have a question for you. You're working largely off a Sea grant and NIFWIF. So how did you manage funding across your collaboration and keep coordinated to meet the funder goals and deadlines?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we have a NIFWIF grant, and it's, I don't know, I'm sure folks that have NIFWIF grants know that it's a heavy lift, the financial management side of things. Basically, Sea Grant handles that. We divided and conquered. Sea Grant handles the grant management, financial management side of things. My colleague and I handle the construction management and planning and managing our consultants. We partnered with Tetra Tech on this particular one. They're a design engineering firm, and then we also did the outreach component, Sea Grant. Well, Sea Grant in collaboration with the County of Maui. So I'd say playing to each organization's strengths. We also had a partnership with the Paia Youth and Cultural Center, which is they're a youth center that is actually located in one of the parks. And they have a radio station, and they do a lot of youth education programs. And so they were a great partner on the outreach side as well. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. This is a question I'm going to throw out to everyone. What recommendations do you have for a community or organization that's starting their Coastal 30 by 30 project? And what do you wish you knew when you were at the beginning of these projects?
I'll take that one. One thing that has really helped us is to establishing your key messaging and stick with that messaging. And you can have a project that has multiple benefits, but you can't have a project that has all benefits for every person, because you're really diluting your effectiveness. But you can find talking points of how this helps various groups, how this helps various species, how this helps various ecosystems, and be consistent with that in all of your branding and messaging. And we found that by creating a brand and creating a message that way, it was very effective for us. I wish we would have even started that a little earlier in terms of diversifying our outreach, but still coming back to those key talking points.
I can hop in here. So I would say partnerships matter. Who is applying matters. When Hawaiʻi started off 20 years ago, maybe, they partnered with the Nature Conservancy because we were able to access federal funds and bring a different scale to their projects. But no matter if you do that or not, it's about partnering and who are you partnering with. Everybody across this board says that they have partnered across jurisdictions or lines or county and nonprofits. And also, so, getting letters of support is very important, and reaching out to the funder to see what is going to speak to them. You have to know what drives them so that you can link that to your project. And so just making sure that you're speaking to the funder that you're applying for. You can have a good narrative that could apply for a local small foundation, but if you're going for a bigger federal grant, you want to make sure that you hit those marks that they're looking for.
Great, thank you. I'm going to invite some of the audience to ask their questions. I'm going to invite Madeline, if we can unmute her to ask her question live.
Hello,
Madeline?
thank
Oh,
you
hi.
so much. I am currently in a project with a historical landmark structure in on Tamales Bay in California. And I am just at a point where we're trying to bring the building into compliance. It is on a wetland marsh area. And my question is really about how to bridge a wetland restoration project with a historic restoration of a landmark structure. And I was just wondering if any of the panelists can speak to that. Thank you.
That's a very head scratching type of situation, because most of the times when you're doing wetland restoration, you're removing infrastructure or other things that have been placed there over the years that potentially degrade habitat. But located in the Bay Area as well, I have the same regulators as you do. We had to do a lot of work on our project with the State Historic Preservation Office, or SHPO, in order to get our federal permits. And so there was a lot of making sure that infrastructure we removed was not at all historic. But it seems like if there's some angle that you can perhaps do that it speaks to the cultural history of the area, you might be able to have those go in parallel. But I'm not aware of any real program that does wetland restoration and historic structure preservation. Maybe there's an angle with interpretation of why that structure is there and the history of it that might be helpful for some public access or educational angle. I know that we've emphasized a lot of the public access and education on our project. We just don't have a structure quite like that.
Yeah, it is a boathouse structure, and it had a ways that actually has fallen into the mud flats. And so what we're hoping is that we can do a cleanup of the wetlands so that it is providing a safer environment for recreation, basically around the structure.
Great, thanks, Madeline. I'm going to invite someone else to ask a question live. Let's see. We have a question for Wes from Benjamin. And then Sadie, if you can go ahead and unmute Benjamin and go ahead and mute Madeline again. Okay, Benjamin, go ahead and ask your question. Okay, I'm not hearing it, so I'll ask it for him. He wants to know, Wes, are you planning to integrate ecotourism into your habitat rehabilitation project? He thinks that low impact, high-end ecotourism could be symbiotic with this project and help support and fund certain aspects. How are you thinking about that?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. This being Maui, tourism is, of course, our huge economic driver here. It's a little tricky to balance the tourism aspects of our project with the community needs and desires. This is a very beloved stretch of coastline, and it actually is seen as a locals beach, a local hangout spot. It actually, in legislation, commercial activities are not allowed in this area. There's no permits for any sort of commercial activities. There's a little bit of illegal stuff going on. So while I agree that ecotourism could be a potential funding source, in this case, it was kind of a no-go with the community. And as Makalea and others were saying, we really, these projects in Hawaii, they live and die by the community buy-in. And so we trust in our advisory group and our community representatives to really guide the direction of this project. So maybe appropriate somewhere else, but I'd say not in this case, not in our case.
Great, thank you. Really speaks to the importance of the partnerships and community partnerships. Tegan, I think you wanted to speak to this, and I don't know if Makalea wanted to say, she chatted in that there's already a high tourism footprint. She pointed that out in the chat. And Tegan, I think you also wanted to speak to this.
No, I was wanting to maybe answer the question Robin asked about the Great Lakes.
Oh, great.
As part of coastal funding, so we can come back to me.
Okay, great. Makalea, did you have anything to add to this question?
No, I was just putting in, that this area really does have high tourism footprint already, but I was in the county before this job, and so I was working closely with Wes on this project. And we were looking at other funding mechanisms, such as like paying for parking in this area. So there are other options that are being considered with community, and is there a way around charging locals but still tourists, but yeah, definitely across the state there's high tourism ability to tap into that market, if you want to put it that way. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Great, really nuanced stuff here. Kate Ruffini, you had a question. I'm going to invite you to speak to if you are here. See you, Kate. If we can unmute Katie so she can ask her question.
This has kind of already been asked, but I was just wondering where you all apply storytelling into your funding process. I know it's kind of like in the beginning stages, but if there's any other input you guys have.
Maybe I'll jump in there. So the question is, where does funding go into the storytelling process? Like literally everything we do is telling a story. Different types of stories that we tell at different times. There's obviously there's the media and image videos that I showed before, but really like fundraising is a story that you tell to funders. Data is a story you tell for your impact. Permits is a story you tell to the government, right? And then community management, what is the story you tell them? So it's really like if you're working on a new project, the key is like what is our overall message and the story that we're telling, and what are all the different stakeholders that need to hear which message to get them to support the project. That's how we approach everything that we do. It's like, okay, how do we connect all these different pieces together so that at the end of the day, the story is very effective for everybody, every single potential stakeholder, whether they're like a corporation or a regulator or a person who just happens to live nearby, right? Or someone halfway around the world will never even go there. Like every single potential stakeholder matters, and we need to think about what is the right story to reach them to get them to engage.
Great, thank you, Kevin. Do any of our other panelists have a response for Katie? No,
I had one thought on that. Stories are so important in Hawaii, and the story of a place is really important. So we spent a lot of time on our project understanding, trying to figure out the history, trying to find out the proper place names. Everyone, most people know this area as Baldwin Beach, but that's named after a sugarcane plantation owner. The real name Kapukaʻulua, it took a while to dig that up and really understand the meaning of the place. Kapuka means whole, and ulua is a type of fish. So this was a fishing, place for fishing for that particular fish. So really diving into that history and understanding the context of the place that you're working in is really, really important. And I think for me personally, humbling, because here we are saying, here's how we want to restore this place. Well, what are we restoring it to? What are we trying to accomplish? Let's really examine that rich cultural, and historic past before we start prescribing things that we're going to do there.
Great, that's an interesting spin on the storytelling part, is the stories you tell to your internally about your project as well. So thank you. Tegan, you were going to answer some of the great questions we've been getting about international projects, and a question about the Great Lakes and their relationship to Coastal 30 by 30. So I invite you to do so at this time.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to Robin Drake's question. Are the Great Lakes a part of this coastal funding? And yes, the Great Lakes are part of NOAA's definition around coastal funding and their goals. And I know that NIFWIF includes them as well. So those are opportunities from the US federal government opportunities. And then in terms of international projects, we had 2 people ask questions, and there are opportunities internationally, and we're learning more about those as we heard on Friday from the Marisla Foundation about some of the international funders' commitments to 30 by 30, and some of those are just kind of starting to be mapped out and planned. So I welcome you to email us, and we'll put our email in the chat. Sadie will do that for info@Coastal Quest, and maybe tell us a little bit about your projects, and we'll keep you posted on efforts. And then I also, Rachel's going to talk a little bit about our funding database. And so as more international funding opportunities come out, we will be posting those on our Google Doc on funding. Coastal Quest personally doesn't have any funds for projects, but we are planning to. We are dispersing a small set of small grants, and we'll be building off of that. So stay tuned on that. And I'll leave it at there for right now, but we welcome you to email us.
Great, thanks for that clarification and addressing those international aspects. One question I have for you guys, maybe it's a little bit of a wonky question, but I think it will speak to some of the interests of our attendees. When you are thinking about your project from the beginning and you're constructing your budget, are you thinking about your funding sources from that point on? And do you have any tips for people how to think about constructing a budget and considering what different funding sources will cover?
In our situation, we really looked at all those different phases and tried to budget for each of those. Mm-hmm. And certainly in California, doing a restoration project is challenging with the regulatory climate that we have. Sometimes we're swept into the same permitting pathway as building a Walmart or something like that. And so we've been working with something called the BRIT, the Bay Restoration Regulatory Integration Team, which has helped us. But still, nonetheless, our budgeting for regulatory permitting was still significantly over, or our expenditures was significantly over what we had budgeted for regulatory permitting. The key, though, is to try to have that flexibility, recognizing that different grantors will fund different parts of your project, and finding as much flexibility as possible. Another thing that we found is that if you could have a little bit of grant funding for one category and a lot in another, that opens up future opportunities to shift funding internally between one category and another. Whereas if you just got grant funding for that one category, and then you came back and said, I really need grant funding for this other category more than I got this grant for, that's a heavier lift, because now you're adding work items in there. So one of our strategies was to fund, maybe 10% in one category, 10% another category, and like 80% another category. And we found that grantors were definitely open to some adjustments that were more administrative, rather than the heavy lift of, well, wait a second, you want to do something else? Help me understand what that is.
Great. Thank you. And to any of our panelists who are maybe working with another partner or colleague in terms of constructing your budget and planning, did you have any experiences you could share from that? Makalea, I know Kim's not here to speak with us, but I know you and Kim worked closely together on this project.
Yes. I guess I just echo exactly what Paul has said. Like, that budget is very important. And if you can build in flexibility by making sure that you have a placeholder in those budget categories, that is very helpful. And that's like, that was awesome, Paul. That was great advice.
Great, everyone's, oh, Wes, thank you.
Yeah, I just jump in here. I would say also, be honest with where you are in your project. If you're in the planning stages, that's fine. Funders they're not always keen to fund planning and permitting because it's not the exciting part. But the great thing is there are funders out there that are willing to do that. Like NIFWIF is a great example because they have several tiers for their coastal resilience funding, and they will fund planning, they'll fund community engagement, they'll fund all those steps that lead up to the shovels in the ground part. So I think really matching where your project is with a particular funder is really important.
And don't be like us and find out about NIFWIF halfway through your project.
The other thing I think we should all consider is the continued maintenance funding. Once, like, everybody wants shovel ready, like in the ground. Okay, let's fund this. I want to fund the new shiny objects, but I rarely see funding for continued maintenance. So really thinking about that, and I don't have the answer if anybody else out there has it, but yeah, just keeping that in mind as you're building your budget.
Great, thanks, Makalea. So don't sleep on NIFWIF and plan ahead. 2 big takeaways coming. I was going to ask you all, that kind of speaks to the question you brought up, Makalea, which is have you had to deal with donor fatigue during the life cycles of your project, and what are some of the ways that you've addressed that in terms of someone who you thought was a key donor losing and changing their funding priorities or decreasing their funding in a way that maybe wasn't expected? Has any of you had to deal with that, and what kind of tips might you give our attendees who might be addressing this?
Well, I will defer to others because they are probably more focused on donors rather than grant funders. So we only had donors via our partner, John Muir Land Trust, and I can only speak to that somewhat tangentially, but others probably are closer to it than I am.
And in the chat, we have a nice, in the Q&A, we have a nice appreciation between one of your funders and you, Paul. So that's great to see that you're appreciated.
We're spreading the love all over.
Yeah. And my job is actually as a fundraiser, so I can speak to the fact that if you do have a donor who steps out, they will usually notify you ahead of time, and you can ask for a bridge grant. And I believe that speaks to the importance that several of you have highlighted with having good relationships with your funders and keeping in touch and keeping them abreast of your work. So you can often negotiate a bridge grant if that does happen. So just to wrap up the Q&A, if anyone has some final questions that you could chat in, but I'm going to open it up to say any final tips for our attendees as they think about their own projects and assembling funding, anything you didn't hear that you think should be points that should be made, or things you want to emphasize for our attendees.
I think for me, intention is important, intention in your projects, and that shows through your storytelling, but also to make sure no matter where you're at, there's always a Native community and population that was there prior. And so just reaching out, as Wesley said, in Hawaii, it's critical, but I think everywhere we can continue to have those connections, and maybe that will become a different partner, and leave a legacy behind. So just something to consider.
Great, thank you. Any other final words of wisdom?
I think one of the closing thoughts for me is that we actually didn't anticipate having such a big, broad stretch of funders as we did. We actually had funders later on that approached us and said, hey, how can we help? We've heard good things about your project. And so what that speaks to, I think, is establishing your credibility and establishing that you are have capability to do what you promised to do, and that you are going to follow through on that. And that doesn't end when you have the grant. As you go through your deliverables and the communication through quarterly reporting and so on, We have 10 different grants that we have managed. Many of those have successfully closed out. And we've heard good feedback from most of those grant funders that, hey, you did great, or, you weren't my problem grant. We really appreciate the information you provided. It was timely, it was complete, it was entertaining. You provided really good photos in your quarterly reports, things like that. Those kind of things build a reputation for your organization. Our organization also has small grants that we do to local entities. So I'm kind of on both sides of this. I know that when I wear my grantor hat, the worst possible thing is that you have a grant agreement with some group and they are unable to perform, and then you get the money back and you got to figure out what you're going to do with that. And that has, I've pledged to never let that be me, because I always want to be able to do exactly what I say and what I promise, and to overachieve in terms of those grants, because you also get a reputation if you are one of those that don't do that. And even though there's a grant rubric and it's all very mechanical and mathematical, if you are known as one that is kind of flaky or not gonna do what you say, you'll be challenged to get grants, and you definitely want to be invited back. So I guess my takeaway is, once you get the grant, that's where the work actually starts, and making sure that your funder is happy, making sure your funders are consistently acknowledged, and most importantly, do what you promise, deliver what you promise.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you to all of our panelists today. Thank you to Paul, Wes, Kevin, and Makalea. Thank you so much for being here today. And we are happy that you are part of this community, and we look forward to following the progress and success of all your projects. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks. And we're going to be shutting the Q&A down now. Okay, great. So this is the final of our 3-part webinar series, and we are happy that you joined us for the first 2, hopefully, and then wrapping up with the 3rd. We're going to be sharing all of these so you can watch back, share them with your friends and colleagues, encourage others to listen and participate. But there are some next steps that we encourage you to take. So like I said, the session recording will be available, and as well as notes and some of the key links that have been shared over the course of this series. They'll be posted online, and also that link will go out by email. We have an evaluation coming, and please look for that. That's a place where you can give us feedback about the series, what you found helpful, what we might consider changing if we do something like this again. And you can also write into that survey if you have any needs for fiscal sponsorship, which Coastal Quest provides, or anything else you want us to know about your project. So it's a way to also have a conversation with us and engage in a conversation, maybe around some of these funding questions that you posed in the chat today, in the Q&A, or that you might have been thinking of as you were listening to our speakers. And then the final thing is, we have someone asked in the chat about coastal air quality, and I responded that we have some funding opportunities that align with that in our funding database. So we invite you to explore our list of coastal 30 by 30 funding opportunities and keep checking back for updates. And we're going to be sharing in the chat the link to that. And I'm actually going to go, hopefully you can see my screen now. I'm going to the database, and this is the database live. It will be updated on Fridays. It was updated on the 10th. It's not showing there, but what I want to point out to you are some things. We have the due date. So in each section, it's organized by the upcoming due dates. The closest are first, and then also the added date. And the added date is important because if you're visiting this website multiple times, you can see, for instance, oh, I last visited on February 9th. I've seen these. Look, there's a new one on the 13th. We provide a summary. Again, this is not exhaustive. It's a best attempt to really capture usually from the funder's own language and website, what the project will fund, give you an idea. But it's really important that you visit the website and look at all the opportunities in detail, because this is not an exhaustive list. This is not an instruction guide for how to apply for these funding opportunities, but it's meant to draw your attention. All of the opportunities that we list in this database, they're curated to be currently open. As they close, they are removed from the database. So all of these are current. Some of them have due dates. As I'm scrolling down here, you can see we've put in some important key dates if they exist. And then there are also some ongoing opportunities. Also, I want to point out that it's organized by national, which is what you're seeing here. At the state and regional level, we're always adding new states. There are a lot of California opportunities, but we're adding states as we go. We just added opportunities for Massachusetts and Louisiana. Hawaii has a great sources of funding. Louisiana just got added, Massachusetts, and I did just see one for the Great Lakes, so I'll be adding that. And then finally, we have some opportunities that are only open to tribal and indigenous groups. So we have those listed separately here to call that attention to that. And some of them are reshared here if there's a particular focus. And then finally, we have a few international grants, and we are growing that portfolio. So I invite you to visit this, give us feedback on what you're enjoying about it, and also to, if you are a funder, to share your grant opportunities with us so that we can add them to the list. Great. And so thank you so much for participating in this series. We have been thrilled to have you. It's been an honor. Thank you to all of our speakers throughout the series. Thank you to all the participants. And I will say goodbye and encourage you to fill out our evaluation, to visit the database, reach out if you have any questions, suggestions, or opportunities for collaboration. We hope to continue engaging with this community in the future, and have a great day. Thank you so much.
Aloha, have a good day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.